And if you don't know what that word, that series of words means, you might soon. I mean, really, we're talking about chief obstacles. So if you know your obstacles, that would be cool too. Okay, an old king from Los Angeles. An old king in the city of angels. Excellent.
Runa, you made it.
I did. My client had to change his time, thankfully for me.
I'm so happy that you can be here from the beginning.
Yes, me too.
Oh, I'll message Silas the link.
Thank you.
So I've been in contact with him. I'll hook him up.
Bill?
If you tell him to check his Mighty Network messages, I'll just put the Zoom link right in there for him.
Will do. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, he's in my inbox. And tell him I'm sorry, and I've been talking to technical support on his behalf. All right, so we are another priest. Good to have you here. And we're international. We've got somebody here from Puerto Rico. Well, that's kind of sort of America, sort of international. I don't know. You made it. Good, Silas. Good to have you here.
Hey, Daniel, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so old artisan. I have two artisans in my house. They're 2 years old and 5 years old, and boy, do they make art.
Artisans and sages make the most fun children, really.
Mm,
Sometimes for 40 or 50 years.
it's good. Here's hoping. Here's hoping. Yeah, the mom and the 2-year-old are going away for the weekend, and me and the 5-year-old are going to paint we're going to paint a mural on this wall back here.
Wow.
Yeah. All right, should we get it going, you think? Hello, everybody. Welcome. You're here for, this is a presentation of TAM Integration's Golden Road. The Golden Road is a collective. It's a group that of primarily healers and service providers who work quite often in the psychedelic integration space and who work to provide kind of very mindful and spiritual care for their clients. And we work together in the spirit of support. We bring in master teachers for master classes every month. And I am just ever so happy to be able to thank you so much for joining us, being willing to do this. I was first introduced to Shepard's work in 2002, 2003. A very dear teacher and mentor of mine who has since passed, named Julian Canuso, wanted me to do my chart so that he could, I suppose, better peer into my soul. And so I got my chart done by Shepard and enjoyed his book, Journey of the Soul, and was recently inspired to reconnect. And yeah, just ever so grateful that he chose to say yes. Shepard, if you don't know, is a prolific author of about 15 books. He's a channel of an entity called Michael, and also a very, very funny, silly person. And thank you so much for being here, Shepard. The floor is yours.
It is my pleasure to be here. So I've been invited to speak with you about something in the Michael teachings called the obstacles, and how understanding your obstacles and those of other people can help us become a lot happier. I'd like to start by giving an overview of how we got here from the viewpoint of the Michael teachings. I think of reality as consisting of two parts, source and creation. And in the Michael teachings, we refer to the source as the Tao. The Tao is a Chinese word that means the all that is, the foundation of being. And the source, in a sense, is perfect in that it's stable. It's like what's at the finish line. So it's all complete. And being complete and in balance, it needs a playground that isn't complete and in balance in order to have new experiences and have fun. And those are the 7 planes of creation. Now, according to Michael Channel, J.P. Van Hall, not all the beings of the Tao, those that are there full time, choose to come and play in the playground of universes. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that can be done in the Tao. And when people, souls, sparks of the Tao, decide to play in a universe, there are a lot of different things that we can do. Like you could be a part of a sun or a star. You could be in charge of black holes. You could be a being who goes from planet to planet and helps design new plants and animals. There's just a lot of fun things to do in the universe. You and I are doing a job that I refer to as planetary sentience, meaning that we take on a soul and choose a planet that has a life form on that planet that is complex enough to be capable of purely intellectual function. We do a series of lifetimes in that life form, often animal-like, but it doesn't have to look like anything we would recognize. And we grow and we expand the Tao by playing with that. We learn how to make better and better choices. So this soul that we've created to anchor us into the dimensional universe is brand new at the beginning. It's our creation. But through learning how to make increasingly skillful choices, that soul becomes a new creator. And that's really how universes work, is that the creation gradually gains sophistication and skill at creating. And so creation is therefore expanded, which is fun for the Tao. It's fun for the Tao to have new experiences. And the Tao is particularly interested in not only knowing what love, truth, and beauty are, because they already know that, but they want to expand the experience. Well, what would it look like in this situation or in that situation? And one of the ways that we as the Tao do this on the physical plane of planets is through polarity, compare and contrast. So we can have an experience of light, which we're very familiar with, and that's blissful. But then we also can learn more about what that light is like through its darkness. If you see a photograph, there's got to be a combination of light and darkness, or if it's just light, then it's a blank white page, so you don't see anything. So we do play with light and darkness, good and evil, all sorts of polarities here on the physical plane, so that our consciousness will grow as we come to see, like, well, when the light is flowing freely, that is really nice. And when it's blocked in some way, this is what happens. And it's not a good feeling. So I'm going to learn how to consciously create in such a way that there becomes an increasingly large capacity for light, love, truth, beauty, all the positive things. But it's not an easy thing to do. It depends on the planet that you choose. So there are billions of planets throughout the universes that have intelligent life forms that are capable of choice making, what Michael refers to as sentience. Now, in general language, if you say that a creature is sentient, that usually just means that they have feelings. But in the Michael teachings, when we talk about a sentient species, we mean something a little different. We mean that that creature is capable of purely intellectual function. It's capable of choices, it's capable of planning, it's capable of a much wider range of decisions than the animals are. Now, animals are incredibly intelligent, and our scientists are finding this out more and more. It's like, wow, we thought birds were really dumb. You know, we talk about dumb people as having bird brains, and now we're finding out they do all these amazing things that humans aren't even capable of. And how do they do it with such a tiny brain? So intelligence really is the nature of all creation. Everything has intelligence. Sometimes people say, oh, he's dumb as a rock. But rocks are intelligent. They are just processing much, much slower than animals are. So we don't have the vision to be able to see that. So it's not that creatures of reason, sentient species, are ultimately more intelligent than anything else, but that we are learning how to consciously and intellectually make choices. And what I think each of you have probably found, even if you haven't articulated it, is that you make the best choices when they're not purely intellectual. So it's not purely reason, but you also feel into it on various levels. So you need all of your faculties to make good choices. If you're too purely intellectual in our choice making, we tend to miss a lot of things and go off the rails. But a key part of this game that we are playing is the ability to think clearly, to reason, to get clarity on an intellectual level. So you and I obviously decided to come to planet Earth and inhabit a sentient life form, which is human. You might be interested to know that throughout the universes where there are sentient species, the humanoid life form is not the most common one. In fact, the most common one is more like the I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, encephalopods, the like squid and octopus. We know that here on this planet, our octopuses are extremely intelligent, if short-lived creatures. But we chose this one, and you chose it. I chose it for our own reasons. It's a very interesting planet. It's a very beautiful planet. We have a huge variety of life forms here, which is really kind of uncommon to have so much diversity of plant and animal forms and for it to be so strikingly beautiful. The human life form is a little crazy. It's one of the more aggressive species that we could have chosen, but it's also kind of exciting and unpredictable and dynamic. So in any case, we chose it for our own reasons, and here we are in these human life forms. And part of our lesson in being human is to, you might say, learn how to tame, to ride the wild horse that is the human life form. Imagine that you come across a wild horse and you want to tame it. If you treat it abusively, it will react and you'll have an antagonistic relationship with it. But if you're a real horse whisperer and you approach the horse with kindness, paying attention to its needs, validate its feelings, you can gradually train it to where you can ride it skillfully and you could both be happy and could both do more. So the human body is like that wild horse, that if we come into it, and have an abusive relationship toward our own bodies and their genetic programming, we will always be at war with it. And a lot of people are. A lot of people reject their body. They don't like their body. They're trying to repress what their body's coming up with. But a big goal of the game is to actually inhabit the body with love and skill so that we can bring out the best. But human bodies, again, are aggressive, a little crazy. And one of the big features of our particular bodies is a very strong survival instinct. The stronger the survival instinct any species has, it suggests that it's not so easy for that species to survive. So it needs a really strong one. But I believe that throughout the universes, most life forms have some analog of the survival instinct, because if the creation doesn't survive long enough to have lessons, then that sort of misses the point of it. The way that the survival instinct is enforced is through fear. So here we are, we're walking along, and if we didn't have a survival instinct, we'd come to a cliff and we go, oh, there's a cliff, and we walk off the end of it and go splat. And then the soul being popped out of the body because the body is now dead, will go, oh, I didn't even notice that cliff until the last minute. And most of your lifetimes would last about 2 weeks, and you just keep falling off over cliffs. So we have a good, strong survival instinct. And the fear that is generated through that survival instinct is useful. So if you come across a bear and it starts charging at you, having fear is a sensible reaction to it. And that's going to give you some adrenaline. It's going to make you think, okay, what do I do? Do I run? Do I climb up a tree or whatever? And maybe you survive because the fear got your attention. And the survival instinct has a lot of other byproducts. It's behind the sexual urges that most human beings have to one degree or another. And that's so that the species can survive. Now, all of these hardwired genetic impulses in our bodies are dumb. In other words, they are meant to be foolproof. They are meant to kick in without your having to be knowledgeable or intelligent, but they are not subtle. They kick in just in case, without much adult supervision or guidance. And so people, for example, who let their sexual impulses govern them without thought, without wisdom, without consideration, can create a lot of destruction. But what is really behind that is their body saying, if I don't reproduce right now, the whole human species will die out and it's going to be my fault. And that's a big burden to carry. So you're just out there trying to fuck as much as you can without much thought taken to it. So the more evolved the soul is, the more these things have a counterbalance of intelligence, of wisdom, of taking in your surroundings and making good choices. Because remember, the animals really aren't about making choices. They're going to have sexual urges and act on that whenever it works for them to do that in a semi-automatic way. There's a little bit of choice involved there, but they don't have the sophisticated intellect to be able to really weigh things and think about, well, is this the right thing? They're just going to go on, well, that other being here seems to have good genes. They look healthy. Like if it's a male, it's really strong. It's going to protect me. It's an instinctive kind of reaction. But the more skilled we become as souls, the more we make choices about the things. So where do the obstacles come in?
Mhm.
Well, as we start to hang out in human bodies adding intellect to these survival instincts, we start to really improperly associate psychological things with survival. And we start to think that if this thing happens, I will die, I will not survive. And that is the human mind getting a little too creative, making too many extended connections among things that aren't really valid. So over time, we accumulate these uh, psychological fears that are ultimately a fear of death. If you scratch the surface, if you go deep enough into what these fears are, they all come down to that survival instinct, which is, if this thing happens, I will die. And the fear that each of us has that is the strongest in that regard is what we call the chief obstacle. And the one that's second strongest is the secondary obstacle. So now I'm going to take us to the Michael chart, and I'm going to give you a little background so that we can understand what this looks like. By the way, before I do that, were there any questions so far or comments? Okay. This is a database form that I use for channeling Michael charts. The Michael teachings are a large, expansive body of channeled material that was first channeled through a small group in Oakland, California in 1973. Now there are many channels who channel what we call the overleaves, which are personality traits that overlay the soul. And this is my blank chart. I've done about 14,000 of these Michael charts over almost 40 years. The obstacles are just one of the traits out of many on this list. And you'll notice that there are 7 columns for the roles. These are 7 types of souls. Server and priest. Daniel's a priest. Artist and sage. I'm a sage. Warrior and king, and scholar. So there are these 7. They sit on 4 axes. Inspiration axis here, these 2, are about the inner world, about emotion. Action is about the outer world, results. Expression is in the middle. It bridges those two. So when you express what's inside of you into the outer world, that's the bridge between the inner and the outer. That's self-expression, creativity, communication. Then the 4th axis is off to the side here, assimilation. It's a resource for the other 3 axes. The first 3 are divided into ordinal and cardinal. Ordinal is what you would see through the zoom lens. It's the details, it's the small scale, it's the concrete. And the cardinal is what you would see through the wide angle lens. It's the big, expansive, inclusive, general, big picture version. So out of these 4, with 3 divided into 2 parts, we get 7 columns. And knowing which column a trait is on tells you a lot about what that is. So then before all of this in the top half of the chart is true of you as a soul in every lifetime you have as a human being. None of this changes. And then the overleaves are a combination of personality traits that overlay the soul to make us more individuated for each lifetime. Any of you who have done past life regression know you can be very different on a personality level from lifetime to lifetime. So we have a goal. The goal is what motivates us. The attitude is how we look at the world. The mode is our way of running our energy. The center is the part of self that we usually react from. And the obstacle then is the block that we're working on. So over many lifetimes, you might tend to have some blocks come up more often than others. And you might decide that in this lifetime, you might say, I'm going to really work on arrogance in this lifetime. And that may or may not be evident in your early childhood. So if you look at some children, they start out with an obstacle being very clear and it doesn't change too much. And other children can be all over the place, especially when adolescence hits and all those hormones start pumping. They can be all over the place. They can be a martyred victim one day, and they can be very stubborn, as most 2-year-olds are very stubborn, etc. So the obstacle that you are going to most focus on using your conscious mind in this lifetime usually doesn't set for sure until you leave the nest around the age of 16, 17, 18. You go off to college, it's a good time for it to happen. Maybe you've explored a lot of the others, and at that time, you as a soul are ready to decide, I think this is the biggest problem for me, and so I'm going to push it to the front, and I'm going to really focus on it a lot. I'm going to really work on it. And then maybe a year later, the secondary solidifies. And that works in a little different way that we can talk about a little bit later. And there could even be third, fourth, fifth, sixth, or seventh. It's possible because, for example, all of us are stubborn sometimes, right? And that's a fear of change in new situations. That's an attitude, no one's going to tell me what to do. But we don't have the bandwidth as souls to work on 7 obstacles at the same time. It would just be overwhelming. We're doing really well if we can work on 2. So most people have a chief obstacle and a secondary obstacle, once in a while a tertiary. And the others, although they may be there, and particularly in more troubled people, they may all be operating in the background and all can be seen. We're not going to list them on the microchart because there's just no way to work on so much at once. There are also rare individuals who show up as not having an obstacle. They're not necessarily enlightened, as you might think of that, but they tend to not have a lot of rough edges to them. They're just kind of easy people to be around. And it means that they're not choosing to grow through confronting those particular blocks, or they don't need to. It's also possible that if you work really hard on yourself to erase the obstacle, and that's a nice feeling if you're able to do that. Or you may work on it enough to at least make it a weak secondary one. And you could then end up having a secondary one come into first place because, okay, I really didn't have the bandwidth to deal with impatience because the arrogance obstacle was really, really hard. But now that I've handled that more or less, now I can work on the impatience. So that comes to the front. It was always there, but it comes to the forefront. For those of you who are not real familiar with Zoom, if you have a question, there's probably at the bottom of your screen a raise hand icon. And if you have an older version and you don't have that icon, you can always just do this also. I'm going to go back to the chart. So there are 2 obstacles on the inspiration axis, and that means that they have to do with the inner world. They have to do with how we view ourselves. Self-deprecation is on the ordinal side of the inspiration axis, and that means it's contracted. And so it means that if this is your false fear that's blocking you from living your best life, you have a deflated sense of self. Your greatest fear is of being inadequate. And it can be so strong that you just give up. You say, what's the use of even trying? I just don't have what it takes. And you can imagine how certain parenting styles could have led a child to fixate on that particular obstacle. Parents who were so judgmental and were always telling them they were no good, they never amount to anything, that sort of thing. So from the soul's point of view, that's a good thing to work on. Because if you don't believe in yourself and your ability to do things to the extent that you don't even try, or you're always disparaging yourself, then you're not going to really get much done in the life. But if you, as a soul, are able to overcome that, are able to say, wait a minute, that's a pack of lies. I have just as much adequacy as anyone else. I can do anything if I put my mind to it. If you can overcome the conditioning of parents or teachers or peers growing up and assert what is true, and this is the truth, that we are all adequate. In fact, we're all perfect just the way we are, then you have developed a strength in your soul that in the next lifetime, when someone tries to convince you that you're inadequate, you're less likely to believe them because you have a stronger knowledge. You've earned that knowledge that you are adequate, that you have the power to create, to be who you really are. Now, arrogance is the opposite. It's also about your view of yourself, but it's inflated. So in arrogance, the biggest fear is vulnerability and the fear of being judged and found wanting. And this can come similarly from parents who are very critical, but it's a different reaction to it. So if the parents were always criticizing you, if instead of caving to it, you said, well, I'll show them, I'll be perfect. I won't make any mistakes. I will police myself to the nth degree. I will criticize myself so harshly that no one else will be able to criticize me. I will present a front to the world that I am terrific, and maybe they'll believe it. And yet their biggest fear is being criticized. So if someone does criticize them, it's really devastating. And again, the belief is if I'm criticized, if I'm judged, I will die. And maybe there was a past life that you remember in your unconscious mind where the criticisms of others did lead to your physically being killed. So let's say, you were king and you screwed up in a war and the peasants came after you and killed you. And like, what kind of a king are you? That sort of thing. So we could have some associations from prior experiences, but it could also just be like, you had to give a speech in your classroom at school, and you were so terrified of messing it up and being criticized that you messed it up and were criticized, and you were just mortified and you wanted to dig a hole and crawl into it and just die. So it's the same feeling. And this shows how the obstacles become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you fear being judged, maybe you act all haughty and better than everyone else. They are more likely to criticize you, of course. But the obstacles, being more kind of unconscious and instinctive, are dumb. They don't recognize that. The obstacles think that they are protecting us, that this is what I need to do in order to not die. Now, I don't want to personify the obstacles too much. I don't want it to be like Flip Wilson complaining that the devil made him do it. It's not something outside of ourselves. It's something within us. But many of us do find it useful to think of the obstacles as being something that has a life of its own. In fact, as human beings, as creatures of reason, we do create something called thought forms. So if enough people are thinking about the same things at the same time, we tend to collectively create a thought form around that thing, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But if it's a thought form based on something that like fear, resentment, anger, whatever, then that thought form does tend to attract beings like parasitic entities that feed off of that anger and resentment and fear. And once that happens and you're hooked into that thought form, it's easy for those parasitic entities to egg you on, to try to get you to be more angry or resentful or martyred or whatever, because it feeds them. It's very similar to if you have a candida overgrowth, how it's always trying to get you to eat more sugar to feed the candida. So it really is something within us that we need to take responsibility for and not blame it on the devil or whatever. But we also do need to be aware that when these obstacles become strong and take root in us, they are going to try to remain. And it becomes a hero's journey of outwitting the dragon, as Jose Stevens put it in his book, Transforming Your Dragons. An excellent book, by the way. Any questions so far? Okay. The two expression axis obstacles are self-destruction and greed. So in self-destruction, because again, it's ordinal, it's pushing things away from yourself. You're feeling like life isn't worth living. And so you're rejecting things from yourself. It's sort of like the goal that's on this axis, discrimination, where you're learning how to reject what doesn't belong. And that can be positive. But here, self-destruction is trying to push things away from yourself. And greed, its opposite, being cardinal, is trying to add things to yourself. Now, greed believes that it is empty and it has to fill itself. It is a hole within the self that cannot be filled. That's what it feels like. And so it's trying to add something, and it will usually be fixated on a particular thing or things that symbolize love to that person. So let's say you were, as a child, not shown love directly, but your mother stuffed you full of food, then your greed could fixate on food because you feel this hole within you, and the only semblance of love that you got from your mother was food. So you keep trying to get more love out of the food, but of course it doesn't work because it's not really love. Or let's say your father was cold and critical, but he gave you money. So you might fixate on money because our inner child really, really needs to be loved. Why? Because when we're children, if our parents don't love and take care of us, we will die, literally. And that inner child is still alive in all of us, still trying to get love. And that's what's behind all of these obstacles, trying to feel loved. Now, self-destruction is doing the same thing, but in the opposite direction. So self-destruction comes from a childhood where it didn't feel like there was any order around us, where things were unstable. And we know from about raising children that they really crave order and structure. So maybe you and me would prefer to just, eat whenever we feel like it and not have a lot of structure and go to bed whenever we want to. But children, uh, because they're still developing, thrive on structure. They want to know that dinner will be at 6 every night. They want to, they want routine for the most part. They need structure to thrive. And usually in the childhood of those in self-destruction, they didn't have that. Maybe the parents were alcoholics, so they were gone all the time. They weren't available. Dinner wasn't on the table. Um, so it's often neglect in the sense that my world doesn't have order, and therefore I don't feel safe. I don't feel like things are stable. And so at a much too early age, the child starts to try to provide that missing structure themselves when they're really not equipped to do that. So the person grows up as someone who needs to control everything, including themselves. So someone in self-destruction would probably not throw a big party because that could be chaotic, but they might have a dinner party with just 4 people where they can control the conversation and the menu, that sort of thing. And it also gets a lot to be about self-control. So let's say your story is that your parents were alcoholics and that's why you didn't have any structure, and you learned from them. So then you drink too much and you become an alcoholic. And then you see that that's making the chaos even worse. So you try to control yourself. I'm going to stop drinking. And then they start a pattern of binge and purge. Okay, I'm trying to control myself. I'm not going to drink. I do it for a while. But it's not natural. It's not like it's comfortable, like I really don't want to drink. It's more like I shouldn't drink. I can't drink. I have to control myself. And then that becomes so exhausting that the person just collapses and then binges and just goes out and gets smashed. So there's that fear of lack of control going to both extremes in that regard. Also, it should be pointed out that the two that are paired together have elements of themselves in each other. So it's very easy to slide from greed to self-destruction. So like if your greed fixates on alcohol, because I really like that and I just can't ever get enough to fill the hole in me, then it can become self-destructive. So those work back and forth. Or people with an inferiority complex will sometimes display a superiority complex and then go back to feeling inferior. So they can swing back and forth in that way. The two obstacles on the action axis, which of course concern the outer world, are impatience and martyrdom. So in impatience, you're trying to control the outer world. And in martyrdom, you feel like the outer world controls you. I'm going to read you something that I wrote about this. The cardinal obstacles are outwardly directed. So that is arrogance, greed, and impatience. Those are directed into the outer world. The ordinal ones are inwardly directed. So you can see how like self-deprecation or self-destruction, it's something you do to yourself, or martyrdom, feeling like a victim. Those are inner directed. So paradoxically, the cardinal ones can do more damage in the world, but the ordinal ones do more damage to ourselves. So if we are in one of the ordinal ones and we can't quite get ourselves out of it, you could temporarily move to a little bit of the cardinal pair. And it's like, so in other words, if you're in the habit of putting yourself down, getting a little pride, which is the positive pole of arrogance here, um, could help you get out of it once and for all. You may not be able to make the leap directly there. The cardinal obstacles artificially, and that's the key word here, is artificial, because these are fear-based. These are not real feelings. The cardinal obstacles artificially expand the self, while the ordinal ones artificially contract it. The inspiration obstacles are arrogance, which perceives self in an inflated way, and self-deprecation, which perceives self in a deflated way. The expression axis obstacles are greed, which attempts to add to the self from the world. Again, that connection between the inner and the outer world. The inner world's reaching out to bring something into it from the outer world. And self-destruction, which attempts to subtract from it. So you're destroying yourself. So you're making yourself less. The action outer world obstacles are impatience, which audaciously tries to act on the environment, like let me to the front of the line. I hate waiting. And martyrdom, which experiences the environment as acting on itself, so it feels like a victim. The neutral assimilation obstacle is stubbornness, which tries to stop the world. Stubbornness is the hardest of the obstacles to see in yourself because it's on this neutral assimilation axis. I'll show you here. So this is the far right axis, this neutral assimilation axis. It's actually the most common of the obstacles, but it's the one that most often people swear up and down on a stack of Bibles that they don't have. Me, I'm not stubborn. I'm just standing up for my principles. And the reason they can't see it is because it's neutral. It's not characterized by what they do. It's more characterized by just putting up a glass wall and not letting anything past it. So the impatient person is a lot like the role of king. I mentioned that there are similarities. There are these 7 columns here. And we know that impatience is on the cardinal side of the action axis. And if we go up to the top of the chart, we look at the 7 roles or soul types, we see that king is the cardinal action role. So the impatience obstacle acts like the role of king, like entitled, pushing everyone around, but it also blocks the positive side of king, the positive pole of, or by positive pole, I mean it's when that energy is acting in its most loving high vibration. Positive pole is mastery. So impatience will block your mastery, whether you're a king or not. Your ability to be excellent, to master things, impatience blocks that because when we're in too much of a hurry, we mess things up. We could injure ourselves, for example, because we won't wait the proper amount of time for something. Martyrdom uh, is a belief that you have to earn your worth by suffering. Now, you'll notice martyrdom, if we go up the chart, it correlates with the role of warrior. And so it's about working hard in the outer world as warriors do. And in martyrdom, you believe that you have to work hard to earn your worth. So you're always trying to prove yourself, which is not so dissimilar to the way that warriors love to meet challenges to prove themselves, like to go on a quest or something. But that would be a more positive expression of that energy. Whereas in martyrdom, you believe you're never going to be worthy enough, no matter how much you suffer, no matter how much you deprive yourself. It's never enough. People in martyrdom are not necessarily real obvious about it. So we think of a martyr as someone who's always complaining and like I slaved all day over a hot stove and nobody appreciates it, that sort of thing. But any of these obstacles can be subtle. And in fact, they get more and more subtle the older the soul, as a rule. If they're really blatant, you can spot them. But what about the person who believes that they don't have worth, but they don't give voice to it, but maybe then they have chronic back pain? They create it based on that belief. Here's the great lesson of martyrdom. The whole idea of deserving the good things of life is phony. You know that saying, the sun shines on the just and the unjust alike? The sun is always out there shining. And if you think of people who have a lot materially, like they're millionaires or billionaires or whatever, I don't think you would say that they've done anything in particular to deserve it. They're not necessarily estimable people. They haven't necessarily served humanity. They just know how to make money or they inherited it. So the whole idea that I have to work really hard to deserve love or good things in life is totally false. All you have to do is receive them. I mean, in the case of money, it takes a little skill to know how to handle money, but you don't have to do anything. Now, to be truly loved, it would help if you knew how to love yourself and to love others unconditionally. That would be the ideal there. But if you start from the idea that I don't deserve love and I need to somehow earn the right to be loved, you won't ever get there. You have to start from identification as I am love, and I'm just going to do my best to embody that in my life. Try to be unconditionally loving to others, and then of course, you'll start to get some of that back. Then the problem is, can you take it in? Can you even recognize that people do love you? Because the obstacle is so focused on what you don't have that you won't even take it in that you're already getting it. So it's really, really helpful to take in, to acknowledge what we do have as a way of combating the obstacle. Like with greed, it's a real obvious example. There's so much focus on what I don't have, and it's never enough. Gratitude is a huge practice for people in greed. Just, wow, I recognize the blessings that I do have, and I am so grateful for them. And maybe you're going to fake it till you make it. Maybe you won't really believe it on a gut level that you're blessed and that you have a lot of good things in your life. But that's one of the things about being a sentient soul is you're supposed to use your intellect, what you know intellectually is true, to guide you in the right direction. And eventually, if you work on it, you will reduce the obstacle and you will take in, oh, you know what? I already have a lot of love in my life, and I'm really grateful for what I have. And when you are grateful for what you have, it increases. Whereas if your focus is on all the things you don't have, the love you don't have, the things you don't have, whatever, then you just tend to dig the hole deeper in that regard. The stubbornness, fear of change and of new situations, it's a real tricky one because it is invisible. You'll have a lot of people thinking that they have the obstacle of impatience who don't really. Impatience is defined as a fear of missing out. And none of us like waiting in long lines or being stuck in traffic. I mean, that's just not a fun experience. But the impatient person is motivated by that fear, and you have to have that fear operating for it to be that particular obstacle. But the stubborn one, being neutral, is really kind of hard to see because people will convince themselves that they're just standing up for their principles. But what is behind it is maybe in your childhood, your parents didn't listen to you, you had no volition, you couldn't make any choices, you had to do what they said. Uh, One good example from Jose Stevens' book is sometimes when, like, the father would have to, he'd get transferred in his job. So the whole family is going to have to move. Kids never like moving because they have their friends there. This is what they know. It's very disruptive. And the parents didn't want to deal with months and months of their kids objecting to moving, when in fact the parents might have helped their children to get used to the idea of it and trying to help them cope with it. So what they do is they say, "Oh, we're moving to another city tomorrow. Say goodbye to your friends." And it's so disruptive and upsetting. And these things keep happening with certain parents who don't respect the child's needs to have some say in things. So the child decides from now on, no one's going to tell me what to do. I'm going to dig my heels in. And in fact, even if I tell myself to change my mind about something, I'm not going to do it. That's their way of feeling like they have some volition in their life. And that is the theme of here in the US, we have the MAGA, Make America Great Again, so called. And that's their theme. No one's going to tell me what to do. There are not going to be any rules, any regulations. I'm just going to do whatever I want and fuck you. That's kind of the attitude of that. That is the epitome of the stubbornness obstacle. And the thing is about all the obstacles is that it never ends well. You end up having worse changes because you fought tooth and nail than if you had been open and flexible. So with stubbornness, the big lesson is learning how to be flexible. Daniel wanted me to especially address, so what do we do about these obstacles? How do we handle them? Well, first of all, we need to recognize them. And Michael calls that photographing the obstacle. That's huge. When you start looking for it and you can see, oh, that's my obstacle operating in my life. then you have the ability to say to yourself, okay, I'm really feeling a lot of fear coming up right now. I'm afraid of being judged, for example, if it's the arrogance obstacle, or I'm afraid of missing out if it's impatience. And I feel that, and I honor that part of me feels that very strongly. And I'm also holding the wisdom as a good parent to myself that it's an illusion, that I actually will not die if I'm criticized. And in fact, I might even learn something that helps me. Maybe if I listen to criticism, I might be able to change something about myself that will make me happier. So, photographing it and then affirmations can be really good. These obstacles are huge and they're not going to go away overnight. If they could go away overnight, they really wouldn't be an obstacle. They're things that are often lifelong or multi-lifetime long projects for the soul. But the more open we are to learning about them, the less defensive we are, because these are all defense mechanisms. These are all ways of defending a wounded part of ourself. The more we are willing to be with those wounds and stop defending them, the quicker we can heal from our obstacles. And the more we reduce our obstacles, the happier we will be. So it really is in our self-interest to do that. In fact, I think the whole point of all spiritual practice is to become happier. And of course, we also raise our vibration and we become more of service to other people. It's all connected. But being a slave to our obstacles makes us miserable. I don't know if anyone here leans more conservative or supports Trump or whatever. I'm going to just assume that no one is, but there are some New Age students who are fans of that. And I'm just going to say this for teaching purposes, and you can, of course, draw your own conclusions. But someone like Trump is very deeply stuck in his unhealed wounds. And as much as he brags and boasts about how great he is, this really comes from a very deeply wounded part of himself. And so, for him to even need to say how great he is all the time means that he doesn't really believe it. So that's not the authentic self. Daniel entitled the session about the authentic self, finding the authentic self. People who do that are not authentic. The real person is nowhere to be found there. It's just the id, the subconscious, the instincts running rampant over the conscious self. So he's not a happy person. He's a miserable person. And it's really pretty obvious when you have eyes to see that, but a lot of people are convinced by the show, maybe because they haven't yet dealt with their own issues around that. So really useful to work on these things.
Otherwise, you might unfortunately end up president or something. Which I would.
Yeah, that would be terrible.
It would be awful.
So if you're in self-deprecation, you could affirm, I am adequate. I'm more than adequate. I'm perfect just the way that I am. And to know that even when you don't feel that, that is an eternal truth. You may not have developed all of your capabilities because you were so convinced that you didn't have them. But if you do the work, you will get there. Now, there may be some things that you're just not good at, but find the things that you really have an affinity for and develop those things. And don't compare yourself to others who are good at different things, but maybe are not good at the things that you are good at. Arrogance, working with that, is a lot about taking the walls down, about even deliberately opening yourself up to criticism. maybe with a partner or whatever, if you have tended to be defensive in the past, if you've tended to shoot down criticism before you even thought about it, then maybe the discipline of saying, I'm sorry I did that. I was wrong. I do want to hear what you think, about how I could do better, and I'm going to think about it. You don't have to promise that you'll agree with them, but it would be good to promise that you will think about it, that you will consider it. So an affirmation could be, even when I'm criticized, I'm always safe. Criticisms cannot hurt me. It is safe for me to be vulnerable because I love and accept myself. If you're in self-destruction, which again is a fear of loss of control, the ultimate antidote is to be centered in the eternal, because that is where the ultimate safety is. So meditation practice, the various spiritual things, just to feel into the stillness, to feel what is eternally safe and solid and reliable, and anchoring yourself into that, that would be a shortcut for getting around the fact that your home life growing up was so crazy and chaotic. Just making friends with the safety of nature. Um, Maybe you make a schedule for yourself that leaves time for you to commune with nature or spirit or whatever makes you feel safe or whatever. That would be a good way of doing that. And ending the battle with your demons. So um, if your self-destruction is around drugs or alcohol or something that's really out of control, you may need some outside help for that, some counseling, a 12-step program or whatever. But I think it's a problem if you identify too much with the addiction, because that could give it energy and more power over you. I think it might be better to affirm the opposite. Like, for example, if your problem is alcoholism, I'm able to relax and be who I am just through living life in a healthy way, that sort of thing. Greed, you could affirm, I already live in a universe of glorious abundance. I have everything I need. And then list the things that you have that are wonderful, the things that you already have. I have enough. I am enough. I love myself unconditionally. I connect with the eternal source of love. Martyrdom, it's really helpful to start to take stock of the ways in which you do have power in your own life. Because there are things others do that affect us, sometimes adversely. It's like maybe your boss doesn't like you or judged you unfairly and then he fires you. And in a objective sense, you are a victim of his issues that he took out on you, and you lost your job, and that's not fun. But if you keep seeing where you do have power in your life, you could take that in stride. You could say, well, that was his choice. He had the right to fire me, and he did fire me, but I have a lot of resources. I could get another job. I could start my own business. There's a lot of things I can do. So look for where your power is. And I would propose that for each of us, our power in our life is greater than outside forces. I'm not going to say outside forces have no effect on us, but I would just say we always have a lot of choices we can make to determine what our experience is in that situation. So a good affirmation here would be, I am the primary creator of my reality. My obstacle is impatience, which is a fear of missing out. I've had issues with time my whole life. And impatience, you believe that there's not enough time. And so you're either always late because you try to stuff in one more thing you don't want to miss out on doing, Or you arrive early and start tapping your toes because you're impatient for that thing to get started. You're always pushing the river. You're not in the present moment. You're not relaxed. You probably don't sleep well um, because you're just chomping at the bits to get on to the next thing that you have to do. So a good affirmation here is, I live in eternity. I have all the time in the world. I don't have to rush. That's one of the beauties of understanding that we're here to learn to make choices, because relative to time, no one can do everything. We have to prioritize. We have to calmly, rationally, peacefully look at, okay, these are things that I would like to get done or need to be done. And I'm going to just choose the most important one to do right now, that's appropriate to do now, that's ready to do now, and just relax and do it. And rushing through it isn't going to get you there any faster. There was a test done in Colorado where it was about a 3 hour drive, and they instructed half of the drivers to rush and rush and rush and get there as fast as they could. So they had 3 hours of being very tense, trying to, I don't know if they were running stoplights or whatever, but they were trying to get away with as going as fast as they could, breaking the speed limit, and they probably arrived in 3 hours a total wreck. The others were told to just drive gracefully, just follow the speed limit, follow the rules. They got there 20 minutes later, but they were in much better shape. So just recognizing that going faster is probably actually not going to get the job done ultimately faster. It's not going to feel any better. It's not going to be better for you. The present moment, the flow is a much happier experience. And stubbornness, there's a need for the discipline to let other people have input and to realize that you're not going to die if you do something the way someone else wants to do it. To realize that in relationships, you got to take turns. You cannot always be dictating the terms of how you are doing things. And it could also be good to ask the people around you, especially your partner, if you have one, um, if they see that fear coming up in you where you're throwing up a wall without thinking about it, invite them to point it out to you so other people can really help us with these things. Any comments, questions? What I think I'd like to do then is talk to you guys.
I can come up with a question if nobody else has one. I feel like you kind of gave us two different stories for martyrdom.
Oh,
Right. So the first time you mentioned, and I don't think it's bad. I think it's multifaceted, but it seemed like the first time you were talking about somebody who doesn't believe it can be easy, right? That they have to, if unless I misunderstood, that the martyr feels like they have to work very, very hard in order to like survive and like earn their place to live.
to be loved, yes, to be
To be
loved,
loved.
to be seen as a worthy person.
Right. And so then the second example, and that almost seems like it's an over efforting on their part, right? I have to work very hard. And then the second one, like the martyr got fired and their affirmation was, I'm in charge, I create stuff, which is almost like they almost, it seems at loggerheads in some way to me. Does that make sense?
So oh yeah. Well, so in martyrdom, when it's unconscious, the person is um, never going to feel worthy, but they keep sacrificing themselves. They believe that they earn brownie points through suffering. So, uh,
Mm.
like a mother who loves to cook and loves to care for her family, who's not in martyrdom, would present the meal that she worked so hard to create and feel very pleased about it, and maybe the people eating it would tell her how delicious it was, and it would just be a, a joyful thing.
Right.
But that same person, let's say they're in martyrdom, instead the emphasis is on, um, I suffered so much to bring this meal to you and you don't appreciate it. And that's going to make resentment on the part of the other family members who are eating it. But in their mind is they have to proclaim their suffering to get credit for what they did and therefore earning some worth. So the first mother already knew she had worth and she was doing something out of joy. The one who believes she doesn't have worth is going to suffer. So if you are in the grips of martyrdom, a way out of that is to find your power because you believe that the rest of the world is acting on you much more than you have power over your life. You feel like a victim. So it's like the mother, I slaved all day and you don't appreciate it. She feels like no matter how much I work, nobody's going to appreciate me, no one's going to see me or whatever. So if the martyr can instead be empowered, if she can say,
Okay.
um, this was done to me, that someone chose to do this to me, and I don't like it. It's not a positive thing. Let's say objectively, like you would objectively have the right to complain if you were parked perfectly legally and safely and a hit and run driver smashed the side of your car and left. I mean, then you come back and you are literally a victim of someone who did something unethical. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but at that point, you can't control it. So
Yes.
you can either feel really sorry for yourself, which, is understandable if you do it. But if you're smarter about it, you'll say, okay, um, what can I do about this? Where is my power here? I didn't have the
Great.
power to stop my car from being smashed. Um, but here are the things I can do. Notify the insurance company. Maybe I'll end up getting a new car, a better one. Um, File a police report. I mean, you just handle it. And handling it means that you recognize the choices that you do have and don't feel sorry for yourself about the choices that you don't have. Now, let's say you're in a romantic relationship and the other person ends it, which is the
Mhm.
other person's right to do.
Sure.
Um, but maybe you feel like a victim in that situation. Like maybe the partner wasn't ethical and they were using you in certain ways, and then they dump you when you're no longer useful to them or whatever. One of the surest ways to be empowered in a situation like that is to consider deeply, what did I learn from this? What red flags did I miss? Why did I miss them? What was my script that led me to attract this person? If you can learn from it and grow, it may mean that in the next relationship, you're going to attract someone much more positive and you're going to have a much better experience. So that's another way that you can find your personal power. So I think it's unrealistic to have this idea that creating our own reality means that we get everything we want and nothing ever goes wrong. That's just not how life on the physical plane
Reality.
is. But
Mm-hmm.
it is practical to consider consciously, intellectually even, here are my options, here are my best options, this is what I'm going to do.
Cool. Thank you. Cool. Alyssa, I believe, has a question, and then Phil.
Um, I was actually just I well, my understanding, and tell me if this is accurate to what you're trying to convey, in terms of the mother in martyrdom, is essentially that the feeling she would have is that because she needs to create that dinner in order to be loved, to receive love, then um she doesn't have a choice in the matter. So she is disempowered because she's essentially, from her perspective, it's like, well, I have to cook this meal for you. I don't have a choice. Otherwise, I don't receive any love. Does that sound accurate or?
Yeah, and it could be that in some family situations, she's the only one who can get food on the table for her children for whom she is responsible. Um, but the energy of martyrdom would tend to create a feeling of being victimized. Um, and a lot of busy parents who don't have time to cook as nice of a meal as maybe they would like, would just do what they need, to make sure that the kids eat. There is some responsibility there if you sign up to be a parent. You do need to feed and clothe them and make sure they, have a safe place to sleep. And that's something you take on by choosing to be a parent. The martyr might interpret that as a victimization, and the person who's not a martyr might just interpret that as this is what I chose, and this is what I want to do. And you don't have to always be super mom and cook a gourmet meal every night, but you probably have to do something in that situation.
Thanks. Thanks, Shepard. Phil?
Hi, Shepard. Hi, everyone. I'm finding this very helpful as a recovering martyr. I'm realizing for the first time that there's something a little insidious about the energy of the martyrdom in that it's sort of self-reinforcing and de-energizing, a bit deflating. And so I think that makes it difficult to actually question or push against the worldview and the construct that the martyrdom tends to promote.
And all the obstacles are that way. They're self-reinforcing. They believe if you can attribute a they to them, an identity, that part of us that holds the obstacles believes that these obstacles are protecting our lives, and they're deeply entrenched defense mechanisms. And so it takes a lot of awakening to greater consciousness to step outside of that worldview and to bring a new worldview to the part of ourselves that had entrusted our safety to these automatic defense mechanisms.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good reframe. And in retrospect, I realized I was trying to feel victimized about being a martyr and, just be the most special, most difficult obstacle.
Yeah, it does tend to work that way. Or the person in arrogance bragging about how arrogant they aren't, it's um
Yeah, I had a friend who's actually bragging recently about how humble he was. And I think they call it actually humble brag now. And so I had to say, well, I think humility is a process. But yeah, actually, what's helping too in working against the structure of the, sub-personality or whatever you want to call it, is that I'm blessed with a sibling who's an even bigger martyr than I am. And so there's this like recognition of it and how distasteful it is sometimes to be on the receiving end of someone who is like there's a little bit of claiming the moral high ground, like, oh, I'm suffering so much more than you are, and I'm doing this for our family and so on. So anyway, maybe reality is rubbing it in my face a little bit.
It's the opposite of the goal of the spiritual path, which is learning to uh, take conscious control of our choice making to create what we want to create. Because again, we're all learning how to be more effective creators. So, I mean, I may have made some bad choices in the past that sort of painted myself into a corner where now I am responsible for certain things. But at any point along the way, I can say, okay, how can I take responsibility for this? How can I think outside the box and be creative at solving the problems? So, for example, if you are the main cook for your family and it's taking a lot of your time, And that's starting to not feel so good to you, but you do have some responsibility there. Maybe there are no other options for you. You might just think, okay, well, I always thought that I had to do it this way. I had to do these elaborate meals with all of these steps. Could I cook up huge batches of things on the weekend and freeze them and have them ready? Or, maybe we order in once in a while. Or maybe the kids are starting to get old enough where they would like to learn how to do some cooking. Maybe I could turn it into a positive and get them excited about making meals. So there's so many more ways to solve problems that when we're stuck in the blinders of the obstacle, just with our repeating mantra, I'm such a victim, or, no one's going to tell me what to do, whatever. With these blinders on, we don't think of other options to solve the problems, not just our own, but everybody's, to come up with solutions that everyone could live with. And that's great if you're in stubbornness and someone else needs something different from what you need. If you become more flexible, you can talk about it and say, well, I was going to do this, you were going to do this. What could we do that would work for both of us? And that's just being open-hearted, non-defensive in your communication. Defensiveness is the single thing that keeps the obstacles in place. So I would say noticing when you feel defensive, super useful. And each of the obstacles has a feeling, an emotional or energetic feeling about them that you can learn to recognize. So self-deprecation feels forlorn, and arrogance feels brittle. It's like you've got this brittle wall around yourself, so that people can't judge you. Impatience feels wound up. It's not in the present moment. And greed feels empty. That's a real, if you want to confirm that you're in greed, if you feel a big hole inside you that you can never fill no matter what, that could be greed. Even if it manifests looking like impatience, like your emptiness means that you are running around like a chicken with your head cut off trying to get that hole filled. People might say, oh, you look like you're in impatience, but it's the underlying fear that determines it. And stubbornness is rigid. Stubbornness is like this big plexiglass wall around you that no one can get through. And you look at it, yeah, I don't see a wall here. But other people, they try to get close to you, try to move you, and they slam into it. So other people can tell you, even if you can't see it. So learning to recognize what all of these things feel like. I guess self-destruction makes you feel like you're out of control all the time, and like you don't have solid ground under you. Martyrdom, again, you feel like you're powerless. And that's really not true for any of us. We all have some power in our lives. In the worst situations, like let's say you were locked up in solitary confinement, you still have some choice around your thoughts and feelings and your attitudes and what you do in your own head. There's always some power. And you may as well grab the power that you do have in the situation, because bemoaning the power you don't have isn't going to help. So I'm all about what's going to really help here. What's going to make the situation better, and everything else is extraneous. If you're able to place blame on others, has that made your situation better? Probably not. And all of these, what we call negative emotions, like resentment, fear, anger, bitterness, criticalness, all of these things are heavy. They weigh us down. So if you want to raise your vibration, which means you're going to feel better, you're going to feel happier, we have to let those things go. But we aren't going to get there by repressing them. by, okay, I feel anger now, but I'm not going to show it. That's not going to help. You have to really kindly deal with the part of you that's feeling anger and process it out. The anger has to be honored, it has to be respected. Anger is just the flip side of fear. Fear and anger are both a perception that you're threatened. And anger reacts to it by trying to push it away, and fear reacts to it by trying to withdraw from it. Same thing. And they're both just trying to feel safe. So, as a conscious, spiritual, evolving person, we need to deal with those things kindly, knowing that repressing it is not going to work in the long run. It might be a good strategy to repress it temporarily so you don't punch your boss in the nose or something. But to heal from it, we need to see, what is this teaching me? So there's several of you that know your obstacles, and I would love to hear from you about how knowing them has helped you to live a happier life.
Maybe Runa can start because she had her hand raised. She might have a question as well.
I have a question, and I'm happy to answer that question afterwards. Shepard, I'm interested, and I'm sure the group would be curious too. What are the obstacles that the US is mostly facing? I'm sure we see all of them in the news every day, but what is the chief feature we are playing out here?
Stubbornness and arrogance.
And collectively in the world?
I'd say still stubbornness, uh, where there is a cultural bias that our way of doing things is the right thing and we're not going to change. Although I think if people get desperate enough, they do become open for more change because they have to. Um, there's a lot of martyrdom in the continent of Africa. I'm just getting that intuitively right now. It's not something I had observed or thought of before, but I'm being told that now. Um, greed is more common among younger souls because it fits. In the Michael teachings, we have a concept called soul age, which means that when you, as a spark of the Tao, created your soul, even though you, as a spark, were quite experienced, the soul is brand new. So it has to go through developmental stages, just like we, as a soul, are experienced, but in each new lifetime, the body is new and has to go through certain developmental stages to get up to speed. So, um, when the soul is younger, it's learning more about dealing with the outer world. And those three stages are called the infant soul cycle, where we're learning to survive, the baby soul cycle, where we're learning how to work within societal structures, particularly smaller towns, smaller communities. The young soul cycle is where we're learning how to be successful in the outer world. And the average person on earth is at the late level of the young soul cycle. So there are a lot of people out there trying to learn how to be successful externally. This is not to say that none of these people are also working on their inner world, their spirituality or whatever, but a main focus of their lessons at that point is the outer world. So the greed obstacle could be um, attractive for them to work on. But the greed obstacle doesn't necessarily have to do with money or wealth or fame or success. It can be fixated on things like experience. I just can't have enough experiences. And so it will drive you to keep having more experiences that maybe you aren't really enjoying very much, but you just feel like I need to have more experiences. So it can manifest a lot of different ways. We see obvious greed for money around a lot of these very wealthy people who are calling the shots now, but I don't think it's super big problem among the 8 billion residents of Earth at this time, that particular fixation. I don't think it's as big of a problem as you might think. I think self-destruction is a pretty big problem worldwide, that people feel that they have to control things because things feel out of control. And I think you see a lot of that in the authoritarians, that they felt like things were out of control when they were growing up and they've got to control everything. Every negative thing, every evil, every obstacle, they all have an element of irrational fear. And if we can just observe how fear is operating in our lives, we are halfway home. If you can recognize your obstacles, which can be channeled, or you might just read up about them and observe them yourself. If you can recognize them and say, oh, that's my obstacle, you are halfway home to releasing them. But the practice of releasing them means photographing them over and over and over. And you just become wiser and catching on to the more subtle manifestations. And if you do the work, you will whittle away at them. But don't expect it to be too fast and easy. This is Jose Stevens' book called Transforming Your Dragons. It's from 1994. It's a really fine book about the 7 obstacles. And he's a PhD psychotherapist, and it's written very well for that. And then this is a translation from a German version of the Michael teachings, The 7 Archetypes of Fear by Varda Hasselman. It's available, one of 2 books of hers that's available in English that you could read about there. So I think if we recognize that people who do evil things or really harmful things or harming themselves, if we could just see the fear that is operating in those actions, it's going to give us some compassion for them. It's not to excuse evil or negative behavior. It's not about excusing it, but understanding it gives us compassion so that we are less triggered by them. And instead of being triggered by, can you believe that terrible thing that so-and-so did? It's more, wow, I'm really sad that they're in so much pain that they felt the need to do that.
Just Shepard, can I shift this line? Like, I like where this line is going. Can I shift it just slightly to one side?
Sure.
Because we have, my folks who are in here. I know you brought a lot of your folks. My folks who are in here are sort of like client workers, and coaches and therapists and the like. And so, within our sphere of influence, we're not necessarily coming across people who are like evil and trying to take over the world or anything like that, but we do come in contact with people who are suffering and who are getting in their own way and who are trying to make positive changes and things of that nature. And so like noticing these and skillfully bringing them to those people's, our clients' attention and helping them move through that. Can you speak to that for a moment?
Yes, and Jose's book, because he is a therapist, Transforming Your Dragons, he goes into a lot of tips for therapists and counselors and gives a lot of anecdotes from his own practice of like people where he could see a particular obstacle at work and he would talk to them about it and how he helped them transition away from that. So that the best recommendation there is read Transforming Your Dragons about
Okay.
that. But yeah, I just would say that the obstacles allow us to easily get triggered. And other people who have similar or opposite obstacles can trigger us. And when we're triggered, that's an opportunity for us to do some self-reflection and get untriggered ourselves.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I think Jordan has a question.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. It's really interesting. And I could ask you 100 questions, I'm sure, if I had a whole session with you. But one that was stuck out to me towards the beginning that I'm curious about is you said like that all fears at their root, if you go deep enough, are a fear of dying. And so I can certainly think of aspects of death that I'm afraid of, but I also have this feeling of like that I've held for a while that like I'm not afraid of like dying or what happens after I die or the process of death, but I am afraid of pain and suffering. And then I also think about it further. It's like how do suicidal tendencies manifest as, or how is that a fear of death at its deepest point? Or maybe you could just talk about that concept a little bit more in general, that all fears are a fear of death if you go deep enough.
With the obstacles, if they become onerous enough, we'll be so stressed that our solution might be to kill ourselves. So, like with self-destruction, that can end in suicide because the person gets so tired of trying to remain in control of themselves, like the person who has tried so hard to stop drinking and then keeps binging. And they feel so much shame around it and so exhausted by the battle that they might just want to die. And it may not be a conscious decision to suicide, but in self-destruction, there's this belief that your life isn't worth much to begin with. So you might take foolish risks. Also, the obstacles deaden our sense of aliveness. And so taking risks can make us feel more alive. So I know I always kind of admired those daredevil athletes, extreme athletes who, dangle off a cliff or whatever, which is so not who I am. But now I realize that a lot of that can be um, the obstacle of self-destruction, where they actually don't feel their life is worth much, so they don't feel much reason not to gamble with it. And the same can happen with impatience, is that you're under such stress because you're pushing yourself all the time and everything has to be perfect, that finally you might just give up, and the impatient speeding driver might smash into a tree and get killed that way. Uh, Obviously, the conscious spiritual path is to learn to love life and embrace it, even with its warts and all. Were you asking me to address the person deliberately committing suicide? Is that part of your question?
I guess I'm just more curious about like the first thing I said, where I'm definitely afraid of going through extreme pain and suffering, but maybe not the process of death itself. Or like, I guess the obvious answer is, oh, pain is related to death, so that's the deeper fear of death. But again, I don't feel like I'm afraid of, like, oh, what happens after dying, or if I was just killed instantly, I'm not necessarily afraid of that, other than maybe missing out on further opportunities in this life. But the experience of that I'm not afraid of, but I'm afraid of experiencing great pain, maybe in the process of dying. So like, how is that a fear of death at its deepest root?
I've said the identical thing, that I have no fear of death, but I really don't want to have pain. And I'm highly sensitive. So I feel pain very acutely. I have a low threshold for pain. Um, and I've just made it known to my guides that I just want to die quickly and painlessly in my sleep. And I don't know if that's what'll happen, but uh, yeah, there's some power even there too. That there are some states now where you can have a doctor-assisted suicide if you're terminally ill, if you're in pain that cannot be helped with medications. And the pain-killing medication these days is pretty amazing. So under a lot of circumstances, you probably wouldn't have to go through a lot of pain. But if it was a place where you were under great pain over a long period of time that modern medicine couldn't correct for you, then you might just make a reasoned, sensible choice that you will, for example, seek doctor-assisted suicide. And if you have to go to a state that allows that, then that might be the way that you would approach that. So I don't think that there's a spiritual requirement that any of us endure lengthy, excruciating pain. I don't think that that has to be part of it. There are souls who might want to test themselves that way, but you and I don't want to do that. So I would just say, know your own power, that you will have choices and you will make choices if it ever comes to that, that work for you.
Yeah, I guess that's a way to deal with the fear of pain. But my question more was, how is the root of the fear of pain actually a fear of death?
Well, so on a conscious level, you're clearly a spiritual student, and you know that physical death is not the end of our existence. So you have a deep knowing that you're not going to end at death. And also, you've probably done enough work on your false ego, your fear-based ego, that you don't have a big part of you that would even care that much if you ended. So, on an intellectual, conscious level, that can have a conversation with me and saying, you know, I'm not that afraid of death. I could say the same thing. I really, really am not that afraid of it. But there is a part of your personality that is afraid of death. And you can just test that by almost dying. And your body will have a reaction to that.
Yeah, yeah.
Your body won't like it.
I got you. Yeah, that animal instinctual part is still, that's kind of still the root of that animal part, not so much the conscious thinking part. Okay, yeah, I can see that. That makes sense. Thank you.
Runa, you were going to share about your obstacles.
Yeah. So my primary obstacle is impatience, and my secondary is martyrdom. And my primary, so I've been working on this for a long time. I am a student of Jose Stevens. So I think it's about 37 years since I discovered this material, and I took it up for myself and also raising my kids and actually running my business in Iceland, having this body of knowledge. So I found it incredibly helpful. But when I started to look at my obstacles and photograph them, I realized that I was a workaholic. I always put more things on my agenda than time allowed. And I definitely have a fear of time, not having enough time. And one of the most stressful times that I go through, even though it's much less now, but is when I go on a trip, on a plane trip, and there's so much I put on my plate to do before I go that it becomes incredibly stressful, and then I'm stressed that I won't have enough time to finish it and catch the plane, and I would have dreams about missing planes because I didn't have enough time to prepare. But I can say that knowing about these things and choosing consciously to work on them, which is endless work in progress, it's everyday practice, I have become much more present to myself and to my life and how I do things. And I have slowed down tremendously, and I'm compassionate with myself. And I can laugh at myself when I do realize that I have lost the consciousness and I've fallen into the trap of impatience again. As to the martyrdom, Shepard, you and I were talking about my features when you were asking me, and I said self-depth. I'm realizing after you were talking, it's really the martyrdom that I was describing, that I felt very fearless. I come from Iceland and spent my first 40 years there. And when it came to, say, business, I was fearless. But when I came to the US, it was like that martyrdom kicked in, and I felt that I endlessly had to work hard and do things in order to show that I was worthy. And that's something I have had to work on, and little by little taking my power back, and I'm pretty good now. So that's my story.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, I'm also an impatience, and I'm thinking, okay, it's defined as a fear of missing out. I thought, what am I so afraid of missing out? I mean, that's the worst thing that could happen to me. I mean, they're like, you have so many years and you're always making choices, and you cannot do nearly everything that you could do. You have to make a choice. So, what would be so terrible if I missed out on this, this, and this, and this? And then I realized that it sort of also goes into the self-esteem issue of, well, you know, if I haven't done this, this, and this, and that, then I'm not going to be loved as much or whatever. So it always comes down to being loved. But that it really is helps me kind of puncture the balloon to think, why is that such a bad thing to miss out? You can't do everything. I mean, what's so bad about just sitting here and relaxing or watching a good Netflix special or answering email? I mean, why do I have to do all these things? You know, it's totally irrational. I mean, even like with arrogance, the fear of being judged, no one likes being judged. You know, I mean, it hurts, especially if someone you respect or think highly of judges you, that's going to sting. So, you know, what I would do with that is say, well, people are very judgmental. People are going to judge me from time to time. There is no way to avoid it. It really isn't the worst thing that can happen. I think it hurts more when it takes you by surprise. I think any of these things that take you by surprise, you're not quite prepared for them. But as quickly as possible to just say, oh, okay, well, maybe they're right. I'll give it some thought. I don't have to decide right now. And if you say to other people who are critical of you, who are expecting you to be defensive and they want to get into a big fight with you about it, if you just peacefully say, well, you may have a point. I'm going to give that some thought. Thank you for pointing it out to me. It just diffuses it. A lot of the obstacle things here are about people wanting to create karmic play. Karma is these dramatic emotional things where one person robs another person of their right to choose. So they're trying to control the other person. They're doing something bad to the other person. You kill another person, you've robbed them of their whole lifetime of right to choose. So that's a big karmic debt. But all of these obstacles is about getting people into the karmic play with each other. And what happens is that if you're on a spiritual path, a true spiritual path, long enough, you don't really want to be on that karmic path anymore. You know, the karmic wheel, it's just stupid and old and same old and drama for the sake of drama. So to get off of that, we need to reduce our obstacles and to respond to other people respectfully, openly, and not take the bait. So, like road rage, that's classic impatience. It's an extreme example of it. I'm not saying everyone in impatience will demonstrate road rage. But, you know, the guy um, doesn't like the way you drove, even if what you did was perfectly fine objectively, but they're angry people. They want to express their anger. They're looking for someone to dump their anger on, and you know, you didn't signal or you did something wrong or whatever. And they see an opportunity to dump their anger on you and to start screaming at you because it has nothing to do with you, really. It's just that they have all this anger inside they don't know what to do with. So if you react in kind, you're saying, oh, I'll sign up for that. I'll play that with you. And then, maybe you get into a fist fight, these things escalate. But if you just stay very peaceful and compassionate, uh, and you do what they don't expect you to do, like, gosh, it looks like you've had a really hard day, huh? You want to talk about it? It can be really disarming to people. So having that objectivity with ourselves can also prevent us from getting hooked in to the karmic wheel with other people. There was a woman I worked with when I was like about 20 in a library. And this was like around 1973, 74. And a lot of us young people were hitchhiking at that time. And she got picked up by a hitchhiker who pulled a knife on her, was going to rape her or kill her or worse. And this woman, she was so remarkable and so pure-hearted. And she just looked at him and said, "You don't really want to do that." And it shook him up because what he was looking for was screaming and fighting. "No, no, no, please don't." She just stayed very loving to him. It shook him up so much that he pulled over and let her out. So the obstacles are a playing field for people who want to learn through karma. And if you want to learn through joy instead, you say, "Okay, I'm gonna get on the joy ride and not on the karma ride." Would anyone else like to talk about your obstacles?
I think Alyssa had her hand up, and I think Virginia also has her hand up.
I actually had a question real quick. I just wanted to clarify. I think you said earlier that the obstacles are, while we can maybe limit them, they're essentially for the span of a human life, at least, right? So, um, rather than maybe changing throughout your lifetime, the idea is that your primary obstacle remains your primary obstacle, even though you may be able to, sort of lessen its impact at times and things like that.
You know, I should modify that because um, those who are on a conscious spiritual path and really do good work on it can erase it and or greatly reduce it. And I think it just depends um, on the work you do and the self-awareness and just how bad it was to begin with. So here's my story. I was in heavy arrogance and self-deprecation throughout my teens and 20s. I was painfully self-conscious, which is a telltale of arrogance and self-deprecation. You're so self-conscious. You're just thinking about, "Oh God, I screwed that up and I'm so embarrassed." Um, and I would go back and forth between the opposites a lot, from feeling superior to feeling inferior. And I worked my ass off, especially the arrogance was the stronger one. I worked my ass off on that one. Every time I was about to criticize someone else, which is part of the defense mechanism, I would say, "Oh, I remember when I did something just like that." So it's like I kept reminding myself that I was in no position to judge. And it worked. I broke the back of it. And the arrogance moved into second place. It's a weak secondary. And I can still hear it in my thoughts sometimes. Like one of the handouts is what each of the obstacles collects. And I'm gonna share that on the screen here. Um, really, really useful. Um, let's see. Is that too small for you to read? It's kind of a small piece.
No, it's okay.
Okay, so arrogance collects embarrassments. And what Michael means by collecting them is that you just don't let them go. You just remember every time you were embarrassed. You just can't forgive yourself and move on from it. And the fear is, as you know, vulnerability. So when I was more deeply in the throes of that, the embarrassments is just agony to think about all the times I had done dumb things. And now I know it's a weak secondary because it still comes up in my thoughts sometimes, but it's more in the background. It's not a big deal. This is I think Daniel's going to share this with you. And it's also
It's
if you go to my website, um, all of my handouts are there under the Michael Teachings tabs, and there's one that has this list that includes obstacles and some other items, odds and
yeah.
ends.
Yeah, everything you've given me, not the people's personal charts, but all those other handouts are in the course portal.
Terrific. Okay. So if you're in self-deprecation, you collect faux pas. That means that you just can't forgive yourself for every faux pas that you've made. Like, like you show up to a formal event dressed too casually or something, and you just feel mortified by that. And self-destruction, because it's always trying to control things, collects malfunctions. It's like, well, if I'd controlled it better, it wouldn't have happened. And martyrdom collects derisions, which is where people have derided your worth and can't forget about those things. Stubbornness collects disasters. So, yeah, I changed, I did what they wanted, and look what
Mm.
happened. It was a disaster. Greed collects losses, which is it's sort of keeping a running tally of all the things that I've lost or lacked in my life. Arrogance, embarrassments, and impatience, disappointments. Now, for Rune and I, impatience is the chief one at the moment. And just knowing intellectually that impatience collects disappointments has been so helpful to me because disappointment is like, well, it didn't go the way that I wanted it to go or expected it to go or thought it should go. And you start looking at that, and I think, well, it could go somewhere, some way, some other way. That wouldn't be such a terrible thing, would it? I mean, is it really, do I have to have had, like when I was a kid, I was in theater a lot and I was never getting the parts that I really wanted. And I was so disappointed all the time about that. And this was even when impatience wasn't my chief obstacle. And the ability to just be flexible and say, well, if I can't have this experience, then I'll just have another one. You know, if this person doesn't want to go out with me on a date, well, I can be perfectly happy and just stay home and read a good book, and that will be a perfectly lovely evening. So being aware at what the obstacle is collecting, it's your ego, it just won't let you forget that thing. That is a good indicator that that's still operating in your brain, if not so overtly anymore.
I'd love to share something on this note. I like this. I didn't realize this was part of it. Um, there's something that really helped me that the kids say. All of a sudden, something came into like the zeitgeist where people were saying cringeworthy, like that's cringe. And as an arrogant person who collects embarrassments, who's constantly embarrassed of my own behavior, maybe even if other people didn't notice, um, hearing people use that term, I thought it was just me. I thought I was the only one who was like embarrassed of my past behaviors. And then hearing people say that, learning that that was a shared experience among other people was such a load off, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Beautiful. And these are all shared experiences. And when we beat ourselves up for whatever, we usually are assuming that we're special or different and we're the only ones who have those shortcomings. And that's just not the case. It's our humanity. We're all um, struggling with these very human issues, learning how to be a happier human. I believe happiness is possible. I believe that even within the insanity that's going on politically and otherwise in our world, I believe it's possible to learn to be happier, to be happier. And I think it's a skill. Uh, I've been joking with my friends for a while that I was going to learn to be happy even if it killed me. And I named my cat Happy because I thought, well, that's going to remind me is every time I called Happy, I was calling happiness to me. And true happiness comes from being in the positive poles of our Michael chart and reducing our obstacles. I'm going to explain to you briefly what I mean by the positive poles. So, all of the traits on your chart here, like here's Virginia. I've got your chart. No, here's the. I'll use Virginia's chart because it has the poles on them. Is that okay, Virginia?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. All right. Okay. So there are about 25 pieces of information about you as a soul. If you don't have your Michael chart, you can order one on my website, which is my name, shepherdhoodwin.com. So there's 7 types of souls. Virginia is a priest soul. We see below here the positive pole of priest is compassion, negative pole is zeal. And here we have the poles of the number. Number 4 is a positive pole and a negative pole. And then all these traits here. So submission is a positive pole of devotion, negative pole of subservience. So the true personality, the authentic self, is this chart and everything else about you coming through clearly, not distorted by love. And the false personality, the false ego, is all these very same energies, but they're distorted by fear in some way. And the negative poles where they're distorted by fear. So, for example, the mode is the way you run your energy, and Virginia is in reserve mode. Positive pole is restraint. This is where you run your energy in an elegant, graceful, beautiful way. You're controlling your energy, but not uptight, just thoughtfully. And the negative pole is inhibition, and that's where you're uptight. So for Virginia to be happy, she needs to learn to run her energy in a beautifully graceful, controlled way, but not inhibited. So the whole chart gives you a roadmap to happiness. You want to be in your positive poles and you want to reduce or eliminate your obstacles. So it is possible that we might eliminate our obstacles in this lifetime. If you work hard on it, if you're more conscious, and at least just reducing them is a big help. If you just don't overtly act from them, which is called being an asshole, um, if you learn to just notice it in your own thoughts and just keep working on it, you can reduce them and maybe eliminate them. And if you eliminate them, you might be done with learning through dealing with the obstacles, or you might take a lesser one and decide to work on that one for a while also. Don't feel bad if you don't get to having no obstacle at all, because very few people do. And it's a good way to learn. It's a good way to grow. Because when you have reduced or eliminated your obstacle, you have learned so much through that journey of doing that. You've become so much more self-aware. You become so much more conscious. So it's not a bad thing. It's it's a feature, not a bug.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So I wonder, do people get imprinted, like kids when you're growing up in a family and your parents have their obstacles? Do kids actually get imprinted with that and then you have
Yes.
to work it out? Because my dad has what do you call it? Impatience, obstacle, and I know it. I had to work it out, and it was not on my chart anymore. So I'm just so happy. And mom had arrogance. I still have the secondary as arrogance. So that's how I figured it out. I'm thinking there has to be something.
Yeah, Jose Stevens writes about that in his book a lot, about how there are certain combinations of parent and child that are more common in terms of a parent with this obstacle is more likely to raise a child with this, or this one. And it's partly the chemistry, it's partly what did the soul that's that child bring with them into this world from past lives? What is still unresolved or not strong yet in them? And that will make a difference in how they react to the parent's obstacle. But for those of you who are parents, it's really helpful to remember that it's not all your fault. Children are souls with a long history and they bring their own issues in with them. But yes, their issues will react to your issues. And the way they react to it is sort of the chemistry of the two of you. You know, how you express your obstacle, the way that it manifests in you, and then how they react to it based on who they are and what their issues are. So sometimes people have the same obstacles as their parents, sometimes they have the opposite one on the same axis, and sometimes it's different.
Okay, thank you.
Did anyone else want to share about your obstacles, if you know them?
I have a lot. Self-deprecation and sliding into arrogance and secondary of greed. And I definitely agree with you that humility is my best bet, and that's where I want to be. And arrogance is something that I really don't like to be at, and I'm working on it really hard. Even though I didn't know anything about it, I was already working on it.
Mm.
It was really nice to get it on paper because it makes it even more clear. Then you don't have to kind of walk through the mud and try to figure out why and what and why I'm doing this, why I'm doing that. And now it's just kind of like you go back and you look at your chart again. Yeah, that's why I do what I do, and that's what I need to work on. So it's really nice. The chart is very nice. It's kind of funny how many obstacles we have, and I feel like a lot of those obstacles are kind of interconnected too. And
Absolutely, yeah.
even though they sound different, but they're kind of the base is the same. Stay positive.
Yes, well, self-esteem is a big through line. The positive poles of the obstacles are different from the other items on the chart. The other items on the chart, the positive pole is love-based and the negative pole is fear-based. But the obstacles, they're already fear-based. So the positive pole of the obstacle is a less egregious version of that obstacle. So, yes, the positive pole of self-deprecation is humility, but it's false humility because it's based on fear that you're inadequate. So you're presenting as, oh, I'm just little old me, but it lacks a true appraisal of your actual abilities. So it's better than the negative pole, which is abasement, which is like utter degradation. But the object is to, if possible, erase the obstacle altogether. So you could actually imagine with all the pairs of positive and negative poles, you could imagine that there are 7 stages where there's the midpoint that's neutral, and there's the positive pole, and then there's slightly less positive and slightly less positive, and then a little more negative and a more negative. So there are gradations of that, and there are a lot of words that could be even used for all these obstacles. So we call it impatience, but there are a lot of other words that people might use to describe their obstacles in life that would fit in that category, but they call it something different. So you just have to look at what the underlying energies are. Probably most of the existential fears that humans have would show up in one of those 7 columns. I have really enjoyed being with all of you. What a high vibration group you are. And I've loved having this opportunity. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. Yeah, over 500 for sure. I appreciate you coming out. I appreciate everybody else kind of joining our group for the evening. We're around. We have everything from, we have continuous classes. We have free integration circle if anybody has a psychedelic experience they want to talk about with like-minded individuals. There's all kinds of stuff going on. You can poke around in the Mighty Network and you'll see. And Shepard, of course, you're welcome back anytime. I love the work that you do. I think it's so valuable. And yeah, it's good to be connected to you all these years. Thank you all
Beautiful.
so much.
So much.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Be well, folks.
Bye.
Wonderful.
This will be up. It'll be up in the channel tomorrow, this recording. Cool.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank
All
you.
right. Be well,
Nice
guys.
to see you, Phil.
You too.